Hi, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. My name's Alex Tozer, and I'm the Operations Director for Operation Wallacea. You may have seen me on one other installment of the Ex Situ Q&A sessions. Usually it's Sophia Wood, but I'm standing in for her today. And we are going to be talking this afternoon to Dr. Burton Lim, who is the Assistant Curator of Mammalogy at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. I met Dr. Lim back in 2012 when I went on my first expedition to Guyana. He'd already been out there once before, and he has been working with us in that project in Guyana since 2011. He certainly made quite an impression on me at the time, and hopefully you've had a chance to see his presentation as well. If you're watching live and have got any questions that you'd like to ask him, then please just put them in the chat on Facebook or YouTube, or you can email them over to us. That is at exsitu, so EXSITU @opwall.com. Okay, so Dr. Lim, thanks very much for joining us. I've got quite a whole sort of host of questions to throw at you today, so I hope you're ready for the barrage.
Ready.
Excellent. Okay. Well, as the first question I had when I was watching your presentation is sort of thinking, how do we relate this back to all of our participants, our students, people who are interested in OpWall? We have a whole load of people who are aspiring conservationists. But a career as a curator in a museum perhaps isn't the first thing you would think of as an aspiring conservationist. It might not be the most obvious career path. How did you get there? And how would you advise other people to go there if they are interested in that?
Well, I got started at the museum. I was doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. And my professor that was teaching the mammalogy course, he was also the curator at the museum. So he was actually based at the ROM. And we were using the collections at the museum. So I just got to know him. I did a couple of projects with him. And so he was the curator of mammals, but he was also a bat expert. So that's how I sort of stumbled into bats. So I was just sort of following in his footsteps.
Did you have an interest in bats when you were younger then, or that just came along?
That just came along. I loved the original Batman TV series, the campy one, not the serious movie version. So I grew up on the Batman TV series, but not researching bats as I do now.
What was your PhD in? What did you do?
I did it on a group of bats called chief-tail bats that are found in South America. So it's really a tribe within the chief-tail family. So I was looking at their evolutionary history. So it was based on a molecular phylogeny, but then I also looked at the evolution of echolocation foraging behavior using that phylogeny. And then I also looked at sort of biogeography, how did the species get to where they are now?
And did that PhD was it sort of suggested to you by your supervisor, or did you develop all those ideas in a kind of iterative process as the PhD came along?
Well, I sort of developed it slowly, more or less on my own. I sort of did things a little bit differently, is that I got my job at the museum after I got my bachelor's degree, and then I went back for my graduate degrees. So that's when I sort of said, well, I actually like the research aspect of it. And the group that I chose was a group that wasn't very well known just because they're sort of the high-flying aerial insectivorous bats. So they weren't very common in museum specimens, but it was really, learning how to catch them properly. So over the years, I figured out that, you have to use big nets out in open areas to actually catch them. So if you just put them in the forest, you're not going to find them because that's not where they really are. So over several years, I was able to slowly accumulate a decent data set.
You probably had as much experience in catching bats as anybody around. There's a huge background that you've got with catching bats, especially in these tricky situations. What would you say has been the most challenging environment that you've worked in when it comes to catching bats?
Well, I've been in several challenging circumstances. So sometimes caves, but sometimes, the caves, you're literally like crawling, on your belly to get into some of these caves. And of course, you're inside these. Yeah, so if you're a little bit claustrophobic, then that can be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But then there's other places where, you have to really hike in, to get into like good habitat. So I've been challenged a few times in the field.
Yeah, I can imagine. We ask this question to all of our ex situ topics, and that's from prospective PhD students. Have you got any advice that you would give to people looking to go into a PhD about how to start that process if they haven't already?
I would say, just, get to know, get to talk to different people. So if you're into, whether museum work or, or field work, try to get, as much, firsthand experience and just, talking and networking with people, just to figure out, whether, this particular thing is for you. So I think a lot of times, the experience of doing something, I think, really is helpful for you to decide what you want to do.
How did you end up with your job at Ontario Museum? Did you just apply for it cold, or did you have another way in?
Well, again, it was that connection through the curator professor. So when I graduated, I really wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. So I asked him, if he knew of any work, and he just happened to be looking for a research assistant. So I did that for a couple of years until the job I have now opened up. So I had on the job training, on the job experience before I got the job I have now.
Fantastic, excellent, thank you. Okay. Something that I've also noticed is you're very active on social media, and you mentioned in your talk the various different articles that you've written. Do you think that it's important to be active on social media such as Twitter? Is that a big part of being a modern scientist?
I think getting the word out, getting your research out. Not only to your peers, but also to the general public. I think that makes a big difference. Like the museum I'm at is a provincial public museum, so we always have to sort of in the background answer, what are we doing, for the public? Why is this important to the public? So I think if you can publish research in journals, that's great. But I think you also need to sort of tell the public, translate what the research means to the general public. So I think that is also important.
Absolutely. And how do you even go about doing that? Because would you say that there are specific techniques that you have to follow when you're writing for the general public as opposed to writing journal articles? How would you go about, when you're wanting to sort of make something more accessible for people?
Well, I think it really depends on what research you're doing. If it's sort of conservation related, like a lot of people can make an easier connection with that. But most of the work I do is in an area called like systematics or evolutionary biology. So a lot of times that doesn't come across right away. So a lot of times
it's a bit more esoteric, isn't it? So you have so many people kind of knowing what phylogeny is and all that kind of thing. So I guess you have to take a different approach.
Yeah. So I think sometimes you have to sort of gear your presentation, your answers to a specific part that you think that will be able be translatable to the average person.
Okay, thank you. We've got quite a few questions in also about the processes of how you do the different research that you've done. Is most of your work focused on, when you're in the field, on capturing bats, or do you do a lot of work with sound recordings as well? Because I saw there was a lot of research you've done about echolocation.
The echolocation for me is relatively new. I think I've only been doing it for maybe 5 or 6 years. But it's sort of what I had mentioned in my PhD dissertation is that I was studying a group of bats that was hard to catch. Yeah, so normally, the typical way of catching bats is, putting up a mist net, in the forest.
Yeah.
But for bats, half the species, don't live in the understory of the forest. They live in the forest, but they go out and forage over rivers and open areas. So if you don't put your nets up there, you're missing half of the diversity. So one way to capture that diversity is with echolocation recordings.
Uh-huh. Fantastic. Is it harder to get a bat out of a mist net or a bird?
I think in general, it's probably harder to get a bird out just because the netting gets hidden in the feathers, and I think the birds are a little bit more, not sure, delicate or fragile is the best way to put it, but they're also in general active in the daytime, so you have to worry about the heat and the sun, especially in tropical places. Whereas bats, so obviously they're flying around at night. Yeah, so usually, it's cooler and you don't have to worry about, dehydration as much.
Sure.
But again, the quicker you can get out, get a bird or a bat out of the net, the better. So the longer a bat or a bird is in the net, the more tangled it'll be. So that will potentially cause more problems.
Well, bats are a bit more bitey though than birds, aren't they? So they've got teeth.
I forgot to say that bats have teeth and birds don't.
Yeah. And so have you ever been worried about rabies, or is that not something that when you have your level of experience that it even factors in?
Well, I have my my rabies pre-exposure shot. So if I did get bit by a bat that I thought was rabid, I've got that, a little bit of time to, get to the hospital. Yeah. But again, most of the times, all the times, I'm catching, wild, free flying bats. So it's not like, these things are coming after me in the middle of the day, acting weird. So they're just, biting out of self-defense. So so personally, I'm not worried, but there is always that risk. But I'm not hugely concerned about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We had a question that's just come in from a certain person called Andrew Snyder, who you may know. Just a message in asking what your favorite field location is, your favorite survey location.
Well, I must say Guyana. I've been to Guyana, I think over 30. I've lost count. I think over 30 times. So it's not a huge country, compared to some other places I've been, but they have a lot of their natural habitat, their rainforest intact. So basically, once you get into the interior, south from the coast where most people live, you're in nice, either rainforest or savanna. They have natural savannas there too. You can literally, walk out of camp and, start, doing your work right away. There's been other places where that's not true, just because the natural habitats aren't around.
No. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful country, isn't it? I mean, and the forest in Guyana is fairly unique. There's not many other places on the planet that have got such dense, huge tracts of undisturbed or relatively undisturbed rainforest. So it really is an amazing sort of bastion of wildlife. The presentation that you did, you talk a little bit about white nose syndrome as well. Would you mind just explaining what that is and how it's affecting bat populations around the world?
So white nose syndrome is a fungus, and actually the fungus is found naturally in Europe and Asia, but the bats there are fine. So they'll find this white stuff either on the face, where the name comes from, or on the wings. Mm-hmm. But in 2006, it was reported for the first time in New York State. And then every year since then, like a few more states were added. It got to Canada in 2010. So it's spreading on its own. And so it affects the hibernating species. So in Ontario, my province, there are 8 species, and 5 hibernate and 3 migrate for the winter. So it's the 5 species that hibernate in Canada. So this fungus lives in temperate soils. Yeah, and that's how it gets from the soil gets the hibernating bats. They hibernate in caves, so that's how the fungus gets from the soil to the bats. Yeah, so basically, it alters the behavior. Yeah, so really, I think the dryness of the wings and on the face really irritates the bats. So instead of the bats, hibernating, saving the fat reserves, they're either awake or sometimes even flying around in the middle of the winter. So they end up burning all of their fat reserves that are supposed to take them through until the springtime when there's insects to feed. So basically, they end up starving because of this altered behavior. And it's been estimated that millions of bats have died from white nose syndrome, and in Canada, 3 of those 5 hibernating species in Ontario, at least, have been put on the endangered species list in Canada. So it has a huge impact, and of course, all the bats in Canada are all insect feeding bats. So this affects the insect populations, and people have done studies, translating, how much this is worth to the economy, because bats eat a lot of things like moths. They do a lot of damage to agricultural crops. So literally there's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of free insect pest control that the bats do. And of course, the millions of bats have died, then that means that more pesticides have to be used. That costs money. But it also gets into the environment, so that there's a lot of cascading effects because of the white nose syndrome.
I was going to ask you about the economic impacts, because you mentioned about the $1 billion impact of it. So you have pest control that bats are fantastic at. What other services do they provide?
Well, in tropical places, a lot of them are seed dispersers. So the fruit-eating bats are seed dispersers for natural forest succession. So bats, typically they don't eat the fruit at the parent tree. They always fly off somewhere else to like a night roost, and they'll eat their fruit there. But also they'll be pooping out, as they're flying. They're active. So again, they're great seed dispersers. Other bats are nectar feeding bats. So basically they're the ecological equivalent of a hummingbird in the daytime, doing it on nighttime flowers that are in bloom. So again, cross pollination. So they do. So they're beneficial to the natural forest succession.
Are bats generally, would you say that they're one of the most important taxa when it comes to, for economics, given the seed dispersal and the sort of the pest control elements of what they do?
Well, they're certainly important. So I see them as what I just sort of mentioned is that they're sort of the nocturnal equivalent of birds. Yeah, so birds are seed dispersers and pollinators in the daytime, and so there are some specific plants that are pollinated by bats. Like in Mexico, there's a nectar feeding bat that is the primary pollinator of the agave flower. So everybody knows agave is where you get tequila from. So so another economic impact there, but it's almost like a one-to-one relationship. Yeah, exactly. So the bats are important.
That's how you convince people that bats are important, right? If you want to get tequila, then you need to protect the bats. Yeah. Excellent. We've got about 10 minutes left, so if anybody would like to send any questions through on the chat, any more questions, then please do send them through. Now is the time. Something that I was also wondering, because a lot of your work involves live capture, then what do you have to do in order to minimize the actual impact on the animal? For example, you talk about taking wing punctures. Does that ever impact their flying ability?
No, people have done studies on wing punches, and depending on the size, but the wing, that punch will heal over. So I've caught bats before, like the next year, and it's a recapture, so I can see that the wound has healed over. So obviously the bat can still fly and find their food. Yeah, so I mean, it's almost, sort of like, getting a cut on your finger. Yes,
Yeah.
it'll hurt, you'll feel it, but you'll survive.
you can still do your day-to-day business.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, yeah, because I mean, it's obviously a very highly controlled industry. In that not anybody can just go out and capture bats. If I wanted to go and just put up a net and capture bats in my garden, I couldn't do it. What do you have to do in order to actually be able to do what you do?
Well, even getting nets. So the companies, there's not that many companies that sell nets, but they always ask for, your permits.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you're saying you're doing it for research purposes, they'll ask for a copy of, your permit, in whatever country you're working in, just to make sure that you're authorized to use them. So, just getting, the nets, you need permits for that. But again, when I do my field work, I need, not only, permits, like animal use protocols for handling bats in my own country.
Yeah.
But I also need research permits in the countries that I'm working in. So there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy, but I'm okay with that. As long as I know what I need to do, I'll do it. So I don't have a problem with doing that. As long as I know, what permits are needed, I'll just complete them.
What was the training process, though, in order to be able to get the permit in the first place? Presumably, you need a background and you need to have had this experience. How do you get that experience? How do you get onto that ladder?
Well, I think again, a lot of it is just working with people that have experience. I think in the UK there might be some training programs where they'll teach you how to set up nets and take bats out. There's nothing as structured like that in Canada, as far as I know. But people that have an interest in working with bats, they can contact me, and sometimes there are things like the opera, expeditions that they can get on, and then sometimes I need field assistance myself. So there's not a ton of opportunities, but there are opportunities. So if you have an interest in working with bats, try to get in contact with somebody that works on bats in the field. And that's the best way to get firsthand information. Personal training, I guess, is the way to go.
Great. So it kind of works on that personal basis. Fantastic. One question that we've had emailed in was, how do you get bats out of the top of the triple high nets? I was wondering about this myself because I thought that looks like a pretty cool idea to do. But how do you...
Well, the triple high nets is a very ingenious piece of equipment. Yeah, so basically it allows you to stack like 3 regular nets. Yeah, so a regular mist net, you can probably get almost 3 meters off the ground.
Yep.
But again, that only looks at the understory species. So a way to get a little bit higher up is people have you can buy them from a company called Triple High Nets. So basically, it's all on a pulley system. So basically, the bottom net will always stay there, and basically you lower the top down to the bottom, but just make sure that the bottom is off the ground. So you have to have it tight enough, and everything just bunches, but just stays off. So it will be like a foot off the ground. So everything, all 3 nets can be bunched together. So you just lower it until you get to the back, take it out, and then lower. So
I guess you just have to take things out from the bottom first, and then the net comes down and down and down. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I was just wondering about how, the logistics of doing that, especially if you get lots and lots of bats, it must take some time to extract more.
Yeah. Experience helps.
Yeah, of course.
And a lot of people helping.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's important. So you need people to help you. You can't do this kind of thing on your own, or not easily anyway.
Yeah. Well, like even setting up a triple high, it's always good to have a few extra hands to hold the poles up and stuff like that.
Oh, we've had another one emailed in as well saying, "Hi Burton, what's the most bats in abundance and diversity that you've caught in a night or over a field season?" So have you ever had any huge bat nights where you're just catching and catching all night long? And if so, what kind of numbers are you talking about in those scenarios?
For just sheer numbers of bats, I think working in a cave like Like in the Caribbean island, there's a lot of limestone formation, so a lot of caves. So like in one harp trap, which is another way to catch bats. Yeah, so usually they're about maybe.
Oh, I think it's just frozen. So I think we've just got a freeze. So just over the crucial moment when Burton was about to tell us how many bats he's caught out in the Caribbean. I'm not sure what's happened, but maybe he'll join us again, or maybe we can get the link sorted out. If not, then
Alex, sorry, I've muted and put up a technical difficulty screen. Yeah, we'll give him a moment and.
So sorry about that, everyone. We just had some technical difficulties. Burton, you sort of disappeared, or the stream cut out just as you were about to tell us about your big catching experience in a harp trap in the Caribbean. What did you end up with?
Probably not that many species, but we got literally hundreds of bats in the harp trap. Yeah, so the harp trap is it's a little bit better than a net where there's a lot of bats concentrated in one area. So you don't have to worry about untangling the bats out of the net. You just take them out of the bag at the bottom. So it's a little bit easier when there's a lot of bats expected.
But hard work though. That's a lot of animals to process in a night.
Yeah.
Excellent. What time did you finish? Was it a late one?
Well, usually it's just right at dusk where most of the exodus occurs, and then after that, the activity dies off a bit. And depending on your study, sometimes you want to catch them as they go back in, but usually it's the first couple of hours that you're really busy. But also if it's too busy, turn the harp trap to the side, so this way you stop getting bats. So there are ways to lessen the numbers.
Yep. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. I think we've just about run out of time now. It's been fantastic to speak to you, especially after not having seen you for many years. It's really good to connect again over something like Situ. Before we sign off, is there anything that you wanted to add? For example, any social media accounts that you wanted to shout out to, or you'd like to point people towards?
Well, I've got my own Twitter handle at Burton Lim. So I've actually been posting since June when the Guyana Opal trip should have started. I've been posting a photo every day of the last 9 years.
Wow.
So hopefully I've already queued up 40 photos of each of those 9 years. So that will take me up until next year. So I think I'm in year 3, 2013. So, and anybody wants to catch up on the last 9 years, they can check my Twitter feed.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you again. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope everything sort of continues to work well for you at the Royal Ontario Museum. Thanks, and hopefully we'll see you on an Opal expedition in the future.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.